All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining me. We'll go ahead and get started here. If you got questions, they'll be below the video if you're on a smaller screen, to the right if you're on a larger screen. All right, let's see here. Looks like we got a few questions in there already. So we will start here with RNH Turner says, is there a good video for starting your swing? I just finished the shallow your swing in 20 minutes. I don't see a specific video for starting the swing. So there's lots of ways you can start the swing. Now the 20-minute shallowing fix is really just a specific course on just getting the club to shallow out. So it's not about the basics of starting your swing or anything else. It's a specific course to shallow out the club. But as far as starting the swing is concerned, what I would try to do is have some sort of trigger, and your trigger can be many different things. So for me, a good trigger for me would be basically what I'll do is I'll be over the ball here and I'll get over the ball. I'll be kind of moving my feet around a little bit, just trying to stay athletic, right? I'll usually do 2 or 3 looks at the target. And while I'm doing that, I'll keep my hands in the club moving as well. So everything's kind of moving a little bit, not excessively. I'm not moving all over the place, but they call this waggling, right? So I'm kind of waggling, and then I will look down, put the club down, and then what I'll do is I'll actually shift pressure. So my hips, I'll kind of push off from my trail foot, and then I'll shift my hips to my right just a little bit to put pressure into my trail foot. And that's what starts the backswing, right? So that's what my trigger is. That's what I find works best for me, right? Now you may find that something else works better. So maybe like a forward press, right? You may go through, and you don't have to do all the waggles and stuff. I'm watching Brian Harmon, win the Open Championship this weekend, and I got to tell you, it was. I'm not gonna lie, it was kind of annoying watching him play. I'm sure he's a super nice guy, and he's obviously a fantastic golfer. But the amount of waggles and everything that he was doing before he hits the ball was a little bit annoying. I think if I was playing with him, I'd be a little bit annoyed by that. But I would like to think I'm not like that. It's usually like 2 or 3 waggles, and I hit the ball, right? So basically, I get in, I get moving around, I do a couple of waggles, and then I'll go. And it's very. I basically try to model it as much like Tiger as I possibly could. So basically, I always tried to copy exactly what Tiger was doing because he was the best. He was the best when I was coming up and really really into golf. So that setup and that takeaway, that starting of the swings, basically what Tiger did. But there's lots of ways to do it, right? You can do it with a forward press. There's players that kick their knee in, start the swing. So I would just have some sort of trigger that starts the swing, and some sort of trigger that typically is going to start get things in motion, right? So get pressure to your trail side, get whatever it might be. So there's lots of ways to do it, but I would just try to find a swing trigger that works the best for you. There's no one way everyone needs to start the swing. You just kind of have to work through and be consistent with with a kind of a routine of what your trigger is, and just stick to it and do that every time. All right, so Walt G says, hi Q. Sometimes I shank short pitch or chip. I can be playing well and suddenly it happens. I'm not sure why. And once it starts, I can't seem to fix it. Yeah, so typically when people are shanking shots, whether it's a chip or whatever it might be, it's not usually like the once in a blue moon shank kind of thing. It's usually you're probably hitting it in the heel area of the club quite often, and you just got a little excessive with it, right? So odds are you're probably hitting a lot of your pitches and chips or short chips or whatever it might be out of the heel, and you just got a couple here and there, and then you start getting more there, a little bit too much in the heel. So typically when people are with the chip shots, it's in the heel. It's a few things. So it could be one of a few things or a combination of these things. So one would be just standing too close to the ball, right? So a lot of times I see people when they're hitting these short shots, especially short shots, they just get really close to the ball. And if you stand too close to the ball, you just don't have any room for your hands or anything or the club to work through, and the club will get pushed out to the ball. So I would just try to give yourself a little bit of space there, right? So you can see how, basically you want to let your hands. So even if you do stand close to it, you don't want to have your hands like this. There are some chipping techniques that it's actually good to stand a little bit close to it. We won't get into that, but if you stand close to it, you just want to go ahead and let the club be more upright. That's the whole point of standing close to it, right? Now, if I'm gonna stand farther away, then I can let the club kind of flatten out. So you can see how if I stand closer to it, my hands don't really get closer to me; they stay farther away, right? So you want to give your hands space to work through this. So that'd be number one. Number two would be excessive into out or out to in path, right? So if I'm really cutting across this way with an open face, basically the hosel of the club is where this is what's coming at the ball, right? So if my fist is the ball and this is what's coming at it, right? There's just not a lot of club face there, but there's a lot of hosel. So that can lead to shanks if I'm cutting across with an open face. Or if I'm too much from the inside, a lot of times that can cause shanks because my club is working out away from me too much. When the club works out away from me too much, you can tend to hit it off the heel or off the hosel, right? So excessive path, generally what we'd like to see is that path, just slightly from inside the hands as you're coming down. Now, if you're trying to hit like a cut kind of spinner, that sort of thing, you can be a little bit more across. We just don't want it to be excessive with an open face. It's just going to tend to lead to the hosel strikes, right? So that would be another one. Another thing I would look at. Another thing that I would look at is just poor balance and your body moving toward the ball throughout the chip, right? So if I'm set up like this, let's say everything's great, but then I come through, and as I come through contact with these little chips, I move my body out toward the ball, right? Well, when you do that, again, it's just like when you stand too close to it, you don't have any space for your hands to work through, and you can tend to hit off the hosel. So those would be the things I'd be looking at. And if this ever does come up, like in the middle of the round, you mentioned that once it starts, you can't seem to fix it. The way to fix it would be to change your intention. Change your intention to hitting the ball off the toe. Set up to it the way you normally would, but try to intentionally hit the ball off the toe. And I imagine that will move the strike at least out of the hosel and maybe in the heel, most likely more in the center of the face. But that would be the thing that I would do first and foremost is just try to hit the ball off the toe. So again, just to review, standing too close, excessive path into out or out to in, or the body moving too much toward the ball. So again, for the fix for the body moving too much toward the ball, what I try to feel like is the opposite, is that you push your hips back, right? And you're more in your heels as you're coming through, and that will give you lots of space to turn the club through. Now, in reality, you don't want to do this, but you may need to feel this if you're doing this, right? And it'll actually be somewhere in between, right? So that's what I'd be looking at if you're struggling with those hosel strikes. All right, let's keep going. So TJ says Clay said chipping to swing the club with big muscles, not the arms. How passive should the arms be? Thanks. It's a tough question to answer because passiveness is really a feeling, and it's very difficult for me to tell you what you necessarily need to feel. But he's exactly right in where we don't want. There are some. So I would say a bunker shot or like a flop shot would be a shot that would be a very armsy and wristy kind of shot, right? So it's going to be more of this, right? And that's because I want to kind of flip the club underneath. Right, so that for a green side bunker shot, that's what I would want to do. But for a shot where I want a lot more control, I'm hitting off of the grass, right, and I have a good lie, it's going to be more of the body. There's going to be obviously I'm going to be lifting the club up some with my arms, but I'm not going to have a lot of bending of my trail arm. My trail arm's going to bend some, but not excessively. I don't want it to bend a ton because that's going to hinge the club up too much, and I'm also not going to be hinging the club up a ton either because that's going to tend to introduce a lot of shaft lean a lot of times and get the leading edge into the ground. So that's not typically what I want to do. So it's not going to be quite like a putting stroke where we're just kind of turning our shoulders, right? It's going to be more, I'm turning my knees and my hips. I'm going to let my arms lift a little bit. I'm going to let my club hinge a little bit. So if I'm just out of the fairway here, it would be kind of like this, right? And what I would actually recommend you do to kind of give you an idea of what it would look like is go on YouTube and search, some of the best chippers of all time. So go look at Jason Day, go look at Jordan Spieth, go look at Steve Stricker, Tiger Woods. All these. There's tons and tons and tons of footage of these guys chipping, and it'll give you a really good idea of what it should look like. That's probably going to help you more than anything. So generally, what you're going to see is it's going to look more like this, right? So you can see there's a little bit of wrist hinge here, right? But I'm not just lifting the club up, bending my right arm a ton, right? And hinging the club up, right? I'm not doing a lot of that unless I'm hitting like a flop or a bunker shot. It's going to be more, I'm turning my hips back. It's more, I'm turning my chest. So I'm turning my chest with my body, with my big muscles back, but there's going to be a small amount of right arm bend and a small amount of wrist hinge, right? And I'm going to be turning my body through. And the reason why I want to do that is I want to come in more shallow with the ground, right? More level with the ground. That's going to allow me to use the bounce more effectively on the club. That's going to allow me to more easily slide the club on the ground. If I get a lot of hinge, right, then that can introduce some shaft lean, right, which is going to get the leading edge into the ground, which is going to tend to make the club want to dig, right? So the more shallow I can be, right, the better my club is going to typically interact with the turf. Now, if I'm in rough, where I need to have a little bit of a downward, steeper angle of attack, I'm going to introduce more wrist and more arm, and there's going to be more throwing down, leading edge, getting in, because I need to get the club behind the ball, right? Because there's grass in the way. But if I'm just in a normal fairway, fringe or whatever, shorter grass situation, or even if it's rough, that's just not that rough, that would be the technique that I would be trying to use. So it'd really just be like thick rough where I just can't get to the back of the ball without kind of chopping down into it. But yeah, it's going to be what I would try to feel more is that your chest is turning back and through, and it's minimal trail arm bend and minimal wrist hinge. There's be some, right? But it's going to be fairly minimal. All right, let's keep going. So Steve G says, hey, Q, can you pass on some tips for getting rid of putting and chipping yips? Yeah, let's break it down. This is probably going to be a little bit longer answer, because there's a little bit, a lot to talk about here. So typically, if we have putting or chipping yips, it's a combination of poor technique that's causing like a mental, kind of breakdown. So essentially, poor technique that you've used, and it makes it difficult for you to have a good result. And then what ends up happening is that you end up, not knowing exactly what to do, because if you do what you normally do, it's going to be a bad result. And then you end up kind of doing a yip or whatever it might be, which is going to be, usually it's a worse result when you yip than what it would be before. So for putting, what I would start with, or with any of this, I would start with setup and just kind of see what's going on there. So typically when you're putting, you want to make sure that you're set up in a way that allows you to have a good stroke and to see the right line and all that. Because really what it comes down to be a good putter, it's really about hitting it on the right line at the right speed, right? So if you have the yips, there's something going on there that is making it difficult for you to hit it on the right line at the right speed, right? So for setup, what I would try to do is, one, I would try to see where your eyes need to be over the ball in order to see straight. Now, that's not going to be the same for everybody because everyone's eyes are different. So what I would use for that is a putting mirror. So this is a putting mirror. This is from Eyeline Golf. You can get it on, if you go to our tools and resources page on the website, you can find the link to this. But these are really good because You can be very consistent with where your eyes need to be. You can practice where that is so you can get a better feel for that. But it's also good to see, okay, are you seeing straight and things like that. So what I would try to do is I try to find a dead straight putt. And then when you find that dead straight putt, I would set up your putting mirror that's got a line on it, and I would line it up directly with that, right? And then I would put the ball in the gap here, in the slot here, and then I would get your eyes over this mirror in a way that makes this look like it is lined up in straight in line with the hole. And you may find that where you are normally with your eyes isn't it doesn't look straight. It looks like it may be lined up to the left or lined up to the right. So you need to get your eyes in a place where it does that. I actually recently worked with Clay on his putting because he was really having trouble seeing the line. And one thing that we found is that when Clay was looking out of the bottom of his, so if he's looking, so like if you're reading, for example, like if you're reading, you're typically looking down, right? Well, when Clay was looking down, he just couldn't, no matter what he did, he could not get it to look straight. He could only get it to look straight when he was actually kind of looking straight through his eyes. So he had to actually kind of tuck his chin down a little bit. So that way his eyes are kind of going straight down. So if you kind of look on the stems of my glasses, they're almost perpendicular to the ground here. So once he did that and he got his eyes in the right place, with looking out his eye a certain way, he was actually able to see straight, and he started putting better when he did that. He started seeing the line a lot better. So that could be part of it as well. A lot of people don't think about like where you're looking out of your eyes. You're looking out of the bottom of your eyes, straight out, or up. Obviously, it'd be difficult to look out the up through your eyes and putt. But that if you see fine looking down through your eyes, that's 100% fine. But if you see better looking basically straight out, which means you'd have to kind of tuck your chin in a little bit, then that might be better too. So it's just something you have to find through experimentation, right? So if you're over a ball and you already, you feel like you're lined up with it, and let's say you miss everything left, well, that's a mental issue that's going to give you the yips, right? Because you already feel like you're not going to be successful. So your brain's trying to do something. It's trying to intervene and do something that's going to try to help you. And typically, and that's what the yips is. And typically that's not going to be a good result. So if you're over the ball and you're lined up correctly and you're lined up for success, right, then you're going to have much less likelihood to have the yips, right? So that would be the first thing I do is I try to find where your eyes. Now, typically when you look at the best players, their eyes, their left eye or their lead eye, you could say, is going to be behind the ball a small amount, which means obviously your trail eye is going to be behind it. I've looked at a lot of tour players putting. I don't think I've ever seen anyone with their lead eye ahead of the ball, more toward the target than the ball. It's almost always behind. The reason is that we want to look out, right? We don't want to look back and then out, right? We want to look out. And then the other, if you kind of look at it from this angle of where the eyes should be, right? It's either going to be right on top of the ball, right on top of the ball, or a little bit inside the ball, a few inches inside the ball. It's either on top or behind. Again, I don't think I've seen anybody whose eyes are on that side of the ball where they're looking back this way and that way. It's always behind or a little bit inside, so that way we're always kind of looking out, right? So, but hey, it doesn't mean that there aren't outliers out there that see the line better with their eyes outside. It would not surprise me whatsoever if there are people out there like that. So I wouldn't just totally dismiss that, but generally it's always going to be, you're going to generally have, if the ball is right here, right? If the ball is right there, your eyes are going to be coming down somewhere in this region right here, typically to see it straight, right? So that's what I would do first, is kind of find where straight is. Another thing that you can do is you can take this and you can just find a hole that's 8-10 feet away and put your putter on the back of it and just move it around until it looks like, get your eyes over it where you are normally, and then move it around to where it looks like it's dead straight at it, and then get behind it and see, okay, is it dead straight at it, or is it a little bit off, right? and then you'll know, okay, my eyes are a little bit off from what I think is straight. So there's two ways to do that, but that would be kind of the first thing. So setting up with your eyes in a correct position. What that also does, typically, if you get your eyes more behind it and inside of it, that also helps with how you're coming into the ball. So we want to be hitting the ball on a level stroke or a slight upstroke. If you have the ball back here behind your eyes, right, you're going to tend to hit the ball on a downstroke, which is going to make the ball hit into the ground and bounce a bunch, right? Which is going to make it very, very difficult to control things. So again, that might be where the yips are coming from, where you're basically set up for failure to begin with, and your brain, knows that, and it's trying to intervene some way. It's trying to do something. So you might do something to try to compensate. You might kind of bring it back and then do something like this, to try to compensate for that, as opposed to just getting a better setup and just making a nice fluid stroke, right? And typically we want to have a little bit of shaft lean with the putter, right? Just a little bit of shaft lean with the putters, generally what you want to have. Especially if you have a stock putter. If you have a stock putter, meaning you went to the store and you weren't fitted, right? You just grabbed a putter off the shelf, right? Generally, those putters are going to have around 4 degrees of loft, right? So again, if I have this putter shaft leaned way forward like this, right? So let's say I'm like this. Well, this shaft is leaning forward like 10, 12 degrees. Well, that means I'm de-lofting. I actually have negative loft on my putter face. So I'm going to be hitting the ball into the ground again. So I don't want to have that much. Now, there are people out there that have a lot of forward shaft lean with their putter. So you see like arm lock guys, right? So if you have like a Matt Kuchar, for example, right? He has actually he went the other way, but he used to be on his front arm, right? And he had a lot of shaft lean when he did that. Bryson, I think, has a lot of shaft lean on his putter. So if you have a lot of shaft lean with the putter, then you need to have more loft on your putter to make up for that. Otherwise, you're going to be hitting the ball into the ground. I would venture to say that Bryson DeChambeau's putter probably has a lot of loft on it. I don't know how much, but I would venture to say it probably has 10 to 12 degrees of loft on it because he has the shaft leaning forward so much, right? And then Matt Kuchar, who's this way, right? He actually has backward shaft lean. I bet he probably has 0 to negative loft on his putter, because if he had 4 degrees of loft and then he had it back up, he's going to have too much loft on the putter, and then it may actually end up getting backspin, which we definitely don't want. We want to get that ball rolling, right? So if you're hitting a ball and you're getting a ton of backspin on it and it's not rolling nice, your brain knows that, and it may be trying to intervene in some way with a yip to try to counteract that, right? And who knows, what we're going to do when we do that, right? So if you're kind of putting like this, you may do that, right? Your brain may try to do that. So those would all be things. As far as again, if you get your eyes in the right place, that can also help you as far as your stroke is concerned. Because I will typically say, whenever I look at somebody's putting, usually the adjustments are almost always in the setup. It's not usually that the setup is great and then the stroke is terrible. It's that the setup is bad and then it makes you stroke the ball terribly, right? So let's say I'm standing really, really close to it, right? Well, a lot of times this will make your putter go out away from you, right? And then you're gonna have kind of that noodle stroke where you're trying to kind of counteract that and bring it back. So if you get your eyes to where they're in a good spot, typically you'll stand a good distance away from it, right? And it will get you to where you can bring this, but we want this putter to go inside to inside, right? We don't want it to go straight. This idea of straight back, straight through is not a reality. When we putt, this is an incline, right? So the putter's not straight up and down. Now, if the putter was straight up and down like this, right, which would be illegal, but let's say the putter is like that and it has a lie angle of 90 degrees, right? Meaning that the shaft was making a 90-degree angle with the sole of the club, right? If that was happening, then we could do straight back and straight through. People would probably putt like this, if we could really do that. But it's illegal to do that. So this putter is on a inclined plane, which means it goes back on an arc. It needs to be going back on a slight arc. So it needs to be inside. When I say inside to inside, what that means is I'm bringing this putter a little bit to the inside when I bring it back, and I'm returning it. And when after I go through, right, it's going inside here. So it's going inside to inside, right? It's not. We don't want it to go outside, because what's going to happen is that I'm going to either need to reroute this, which is typically not going to work out well, or I'm going to come in, right, and I'm going to cut across it, or I'm going to try to do something, a yip, right, try to get that to be back on track. So we want to go ahead and let this putter track to the inside of the inside. Now, the farther you stand away from it, typically the more arc you're going to have in your stroke. The closer you stand to it, the more of a slight arc you're going to have in your stroke. So that's something that can really help you to get rid of the yips, as well as getting set up correctly. And we want to have this putter kind of going through your forearm. So that's another thing you'd want to look at is your putting grip. We want to have it. A good way to kind of think about this is to kind of hold it straight out in front of you like this, right? And we want this to all be your arms, and you want to grip the putter in a way that allows you to hold it straight out in front of you like this. So it's like a straight line from your shoulder all the way to the putter head, right? And then what you do is you'll kind of lower it down to where your elbows kind of come closer to your body, right? We still want to have it kind of in line with my forearms, right? And then I'm just going to bend down to the ground. And if I do that, now everything's going to be nice and lined up in a good spot, right? If I have the putter like this, or if I'm like this, that's typically the putter is not going to work properly, right? It's not going to want to swing back, naturally. But if we get it in line with our forearms, right, and we have to have a grip that has it going through more of the palms to make that happen, then that's going to make it a lot easier, right? So I would look at your setup, make sure that your setup is good, make sure that you're seeing straight, and then see how, once you get set up correctly, how that actually affects your stroke, right? So that typically will help with the yips. Another thing that will help with the yips, and I think they've actually done studies on this, is to actually get a different putter, use a different tool, right? Because it may just be your brain is just associating bad things with this tool, with the putter, and that is causing the issues. So get fit for your putter, get a new putter. That can also help with the yips. It's a little bit more expensive, right, of a solution typically, and it's not even guaranteed solution, but it has been known to work to kind of change the tools. Tour players switch putters all the time. You're going to see them use different putters, all the time. Even Tigers used many different putters. Jack Nicklaus was known for using all kinds of putter. I mean, he used a giant putter, one time, won a major with it. So, it's about, sometimes you just need a little change, if you're struggling, because it can kind of give you a rebirth, a new way of looking at it, right? So that's what I'd be looking at for the putting. Now, with the chipping, it's typically very similar. The issues, it's typically due to poor technique, and almost always when people struggle with chipping yips, it's because of poor ground interaction, right? So what typically happens is we're getting the leading edge into the ground, and we're basically making it to where you have little to no margin for error on these shots, right? So basically, you have to have that club coming down perfectly in order to hit a good shot. Otherwise, it's going to be a chunk or it's going to be a blade, right? And when you're set up over the ball and you know that there's a really good chance that you're going to chunk or blade it, right? Your brain is going to yip. It's going to make you yip. Typically, right? It's not usually going to hit that perfect chip that that you time perfectly. It's typically going to make a yip. So what we want to make sure that we're doing is that we have a good setup and that we have a proper technique within that setup. Now, typically, we can have a good setup and still have poor technique. That's a little bit different. How chipping is different than putting. There's more moving parts with chipping than there is with putting. So that's why that is. So let's just go over real quickly basically almost a yip-proof method to chipping that can really help you. So what we need to make sure that we're doing is that we're using the bounce and the sole of the club properly, and that interaction with the ground is correct. Because typically, if you use the correct setup and technique, and you're having good ground interaction, you could hit behind the ball a couple inches and still hit a great shot. And that's really what a lot of the tour players are doing. They have a very high margin for error, which allows them to be very consistent with their chipping, right? So you just need to create a technique or create a situation where you have a high margin for error, so that way you have confidence in what you're doing. So the idea here is we just don't want to get this leading edge hitting the ground first, right? So when I see a lot of people chipping, a big no-no is they'll have their hands way forward, right? So they'll be like this when they're chipping, right? The reason why this is bad, or why I would not recommend doing this, especially if you have the yips, is because when we get the shaft leaning forward, that gets the leading edge hitting the ground first, right? If we have, especially if we're using like a lob wedge, if we're using a lob wedge that has a sharp leading edge on it, this is like a 50-degree wedge. But if you're using a wedge that has a sharp leading edge on it, that hits the ground. That if you hit a half inch behind the ball, it's typically going to be a bad shot, right? So we want to get that shaft much closer to straight up and down. We want to have those hands right in front of you typically. Now, a little bit of shaft lean is fine, but pretty close to straight up and down is typically what I like to see for your standard chip shot. So, and as I mentioned earlier, if you have the hands more forward for for a shot where we're needing to dig it up out of some thick rough, that's different, right? You're not typically going to yip those shots, right? You want the club to dig in those situations, right? We want it to get up underneath the ball. But when we're hitting off of turf, like a tight turf, and they're making the turfer they're making the turf tighter and tighter and tighter. Everywhere I go, the turf is tighter and tighter and tighter. It used to be more plush. Now a lot of places keep that turf pretty tight, at least places that I play anyway. So it's becoming more and more. The tighter the turf is, typically the more likely you're going to get the yips, right? Because it's much more difficult to get that good turf interaction. So having that shaft more straight up and down is definitely going to help quite a bit, because that's going to introduce the bounce more. That's going to get to where this chunk of metal here, so this part here, that's going to get to where this is interacting with the turf first, right? And I can sit here all I want and hit the ground, and it won't dig, right? And that's what we want, right? So just like if I have this shaft straight up and down, I don't want to have this straight up and down and then come into contact like this typically, because again, that's going to get the leading edge in there. So I kind of want to return it, right, to that same kind of position, right? So there's going to be a little bit of hinge, a little bit of unhinge as you come through to keep that leading edge from getting into the ground, right? Now the next one, this is one that really, really helps, and that a lot of people don't know about, is hitting more of a toe down chip, right? So that way you're coming in more like this. The reason why this helps is because if I have this club soled to the ground, right, then I have to get this entire club underneath the ball, right? But if I go toe down a little bit, then I only have to get this part underneath the ball, right? And it's a lot easier to get the toe down underneath the ball. You think of it like a spoon, like getting kind of scooping it out of there, right? So if you stand a little bit closer to it and let the handle get a little bit taller, right, and your grip, it may be a little bit more in the hands when you do this, right? And we have the shaft more straight up and down from this angle, and we don't do a bunch of wrist and arm bend, and we use our, what we talked about earlier, the bigger muscles, minimal arm bend, minimal wrist bend. That's going to allow us to come in very shallow, because if we come in steeply, right, that's going to make it want to kind of dig. So if I come in more shallow, I try to create a big circle with the club, right? I'm using my knees and my hips and turning my chest, right? And I get this shaft more straight up and down, and I get this the toe more down. And when I get the toe more down, I'm just going to play it a little bit toward the toe. When you do that, you can come in and you can hit the ground behind the ball and it's going to slide on the turf and you're going to hit good shots. And you want to make sure that you're trying to hit the ground, right? Really try to feel like you're hitting the ground. You're not trying to pick it off the ground. You're trying to make sure that you're hitting the ground, right? And you want to keep your body moving forward, right? So I'm going to have my feet close together, shaft straight up and down, toe down. I'm going to use my body. And when I use my body, right, what I want to do is I want to feel my body move forward a little bit. So what I don't want to do is I don't want to bring it back and then move my head backward, right? Because then that's going to get me too far behind. If I bring this club back and I let my head drift forward toward the target a little bit. Now, we don't want to be really excessive and get out here, but if I just feel a little bit more, I feel pressure moving into my lead foot and keeping on my lead foot, then that's going to help you to keep the bottom of that swing arc in this area. It's going to help you. It's going to help you to do that. So if you use this technique, I'm telling you, you won't yip it anymore. And you can also open up the face just a little bit as well. That will, if you open up the face just a little bit, that will help expose more of the bounce and help it slide on the turf more, right? So if you follow those tips, right, and you go out and practice it, you won't yip it, and you won't yip it ever again, because the only time you'll yip it is if you forget to hit the ground. That's the only time. That's the only time I've seen anybody yip it using this technique, is that they have the mindset that they're trying to pick it off the turf, because that's what they were trying to do before, right? Because that's what they had to do, because they had to have perfect timing, right? And if you have to have perfect timing, you do have to pick it off the turf, but you're going to lend yourself to blades and chunks when you do that. So if you use this technique and you swing with the intention of hitting the ground, and I'm telling you, the club will not dig if you do this. Now, if you find the club digging, right? Now, I should reframe that. Some lies it may dig. Like if it's like a muddy lie, it may tend to dig a little bit. So if that's the situation there, I just open up the face a little bit more, so that way it can glide a little bit better. But generally, most lies, it just won't dig if you go toe down and you have the shaft more straight up and down, and you're not coming down steep. If you come in nice and shallow and let that club hit the ground where the ball is, your yips are going to go away. Sorry for a long form answer. There's a lot to talk about there, but should help. All right, so Ronnie W says, hi Q, completed level 1 of the stable fluid spine course, and I'm working on the level 1 test. Clay recommended 1,000 reps. I assume that is 1,000 good reps plus the other 2 exaggerated reps. Is that correct? So total of 3,000 reps. I'm not 100% sure, but I will say anytime we're telling you to do 1,000, 3,000 reps or whatever it is, that's really kind of the minimum of what you need to do. There's nothing magic about 1,000 or 3,000 reps or anything like that. You really just need to do enough to make it second nature, right? So what that means is that you need to do enough reps to where you've done so many reps that you don't even have to think about it and you do it automatically. That's essentially what it comes down to. So we found that that's usually at least 1,000, 3,000 reps from whatever it might be. So again, I'm not really sure if it means 1,000 or 3,000 reps, honestly, because it really doesn't matter. It only matters that you learn. It's not like you just do the 1,000 reps and you're suddenly going to have it, right? If you do the 1,000 reps, or even if you do 3,000 reps and it's not second nature, then you need to keep doing reps until it is, right? So, and there may be some people that don't need to do 1,000. I would say that's fairly rare. In those cases, it would be someone who's basically they probably already do it or used to do it, and you're just doing reps to kind of remind you of what to do it, of how to do it, right? And then you just go back to doing it like you did before. But if it's a totally new thing that you've never done in your swing before, it's typically going to take at least 1,000 or 3,000 or more, you know? So yeah, you really just got to do as many as it takes. I'm sorry, I don't know exactly how many, but if you go by the guideline of, okay, I've done 1,000 reps, but when I don't think about it, I go back to what I did before, then you got to keep putting the reps in. All right. Hopefully that makes sense. So Mike S says, does ball position have an effect on ball direction and flight? Yeah, it certainly can. I mean, all things equal, it certainly can. So if I put the ball more forward in my stance, right? Because the club comes down on an arc, right? So if you imagine my club's coming down an arc. So if my club's coming down an arc, it's going into out, into out, into out, into out, and then it turns the corner, then it's going out to in, out to in, out to in, right? So it's moving to the right, turns the corner, then moves to the left, right? Well, if my ball position's up here, then my club path is typically going to be more to the left and my face is going to be more closed, right, than it was right here, right? And back here, if I hit the ball back here where my right hand is, my club path is going to be more to the right and my face is going to be more open, right? So yeah, changing the ball position can certainly change those things. If you make the exact same swing with the same swing direction, club path, right? Your ball flight can change for sure. And usually when you put the ball farther up in your stance, it will typically go higher because you will have added more loft by the time you get to here, right? And if I'm here, right, I'm typically going to hit it lower if I hit the ball more back in my stance because my hands are typically going to be more forward, right? So yeah, ball position can definitely make a difference. So when should you change ball position? So let's just talk about ball position a little bit more. So ball position, generally, any shot that you're hitting off the turf a little bit forward to the middle of the stance is going to be a good ball position for most people. Now, a lot of it can depend on your release pattern. So if you have a very late release, which most people don't, but let's say you're like a Dustin Johnson, you have a very late release. Well, you can afford to have your ball position more forward, right? Because if I have an early release, right, and let's say I have my ball position where Dustin Johnson's is, right? So Dustin Johnson plays like his 8-iron about right there. It's 2 balls forward probably of the middle of his stance. So if you're for Dustin Johnson, he's right here. This is his impact position, right? So he has a lot of shaft length because he's releasing it way out here, way more out in front than even more than your average tour player, right? So he has a ton of shaft lean here. If you played the ball position really far back, you'd probably hit the ball a little bit too low. So he probably to hit the ball a little bit higher, he plays it a little bit more forward in his stance. But if a recreational golfer, typically recreational golfers have earlier releases, right? If they put that ball position there where Dustin Johnson is, this would be their impact position, right? It'd probably be too much loft, right? And now I'm not getting the compression on the ball. So that golfer is probably going to be better having that ball position more toward the middle. So that way, when they come in, they can have their hands ahead at least a little bit, and that's going to give them a better contact. So generally, and that's where I play my ball position. I play my ball position. I don't have as late of a release as Dustin Johnson. I play my ball position, about a little forward to the middle of the stance. I actually play wedges more in the middle of the stance. That promotes more of a downward angle of attack, and which promotes more spin and lower ball flight, which is ideally what you would want for a wedge. Now, if I play that same ball position with 3-wood, I hit it too low. So I play my 3-wood a little bit forward of that when I'm hitting it off the ground. Obviously, a driver, you play forward in the stance, more forward in the stance. And with the drive, this is a big reason why a lot of people struggle with the drivers, because as I mentioned before, when the ball is more forward in your stance, you're going to tend to swing more. The club's going to tend to want to work more out to in, right? So because of that, we actually need to shallow out the club more with the driver, so that way it's more neutral by the time it gets to the ball, right? So we need to shift that swing direction more to the right, so that way, for right-handed golfers, so that way they're able to get that path to be more neutral. So yeah, most golfers are going to be better playing a ball position for any shot that's off the ground, just forward to the middle of the stance or middle of the stance for a lot of golfers, because that's going to help to promote a much better club path and compression on the ball. But for the driver, we just got to get that driver shallowing out in order to hit straighter. All right, let's keep going. So Peter B says, hi, Q, what is the swing speed range for a 7-iron? I'm 77, swinging between 57 to 65. Thanks. I mean, a tour player is going to be usually low, like 90 to 100 typically. But that's that's a tour player. So that's what the range is for a tour player. I don't know if that's what you're asking, but for a pro, it's typically going to be between 90 and 100. If you're looking to increase your club head speed, then I would recommend working through the 20-minute distance fix. That course is all about increasing your club head speed. Now I know you asked about the 7-iron, but and the 20-minute distance fix is with the driver. But when you raise your club head speed with your driver, everything gets raised up, right? So it wouldn't be a situation where you need to work through the course with your 7-iron to increase your 7-iron. No, you work through it with your driver, and you'll gain club head speed with all your clubs. So John R says, "Hi Q, can you talk about the rotation of the hands in the swing? Maybe focus on where the back of the left hand points throughout the swing. I think in an attempt to make a wide swing, I'm keeping my right hand on top of the left hand, and which is constricting a shoulder turn." Yeah, so there needs to be some amount of forearm roll in the backswing. Now, as far as where your wrist is pointing, a lot of that is going to depend on your grip, right? So if you have a weak grip where basically the back of your left hand matches up with the club face, right? Then you're going to generally have more of a bowed wrist, like a column workout at the top, and as you're coming down in that impact, right? If you have more of a neutral grip, like a tiger, where your lead hand is closed to the club face, then you're going to tend to have more of a flat wrist at the top and a flat wrist at impact. If you're someone who has a very strong grip, like a Matthew Fitzpatrick, whose lead hand's almost perpendicular to the club face, right? Then you can have some cupping in your wrist. It can't be excessive, but you can have some cupping in the wrist, and also have some cupping at impact. So it sounds like to me that you're probably folding your right arm back, right, and not letting your arms kind of roll over a little bit. So go ahead and let that right arm kind of do this action. Let it externally rotate. You're probably not. So external rotation is losing an arm wrestling contest. So I would try to feel like with your right arm that you're losing an arm wrestling contest at the top, right? Because if you're trying to keep that on top like this, you're going to tend to come over the top in the downswing because that elbow is just getting behind you, and it's going to tend to not be very powerful either. So go ahead and let that club face open up, because you're going to bring it back to impact. So Kurt B says Bryson 6 degrees. Not sure what that means, but keep on going here. So Diane C says, "Hi Q, can you demo how to use the swing plate? I would like to consider it for helping my swing path immediate feedback." Yeah, so if you're using, that's what this guy is right here. I'll put a link in the chat to where you can pick one of these up. Now you can use this for all kinds of things, but basically what it is, it's just a heavy metal plate that holds an alignment stick, and it can hold it at different angles. So it comes with a tool that you can kind of like loosen it up and move it around. But yeah, you just put an alignment stick in it. I recommend using the pool noodle as well, just to protect yourself. These are fiberglass and can break, and when they break, they are sharp. And I would hate to hear somebody getting, stuck with one of these. So you put the alignment or the pool noodle over it to protect it. But basically, the very easy drill that you can do with this to shallow out your swing would be to put it behind your ball, like 2 or 3 feet, and then about 6 inches outside the ball. So you can also put an alignment. There's another slot to put your alignment stick kind of through here. So if you have an alignment stick right here, I can actually do that. So if I set this up, put the alignment stick in there. Sorry, you probably can't see the plate. Put the alignment stick there. But so this alignment stick here is, let let me bring it back this way a little bit so you can see. All right. So there, now you can see the alignment stick, right? So if I have that alignment stick there, I have this, I know the swing plate's out of frame, but it's going to be about 2 or 3 feet behind the ball, right? So I have about 6 inches between that stick and the ball here, right? And I have this about 2 or 3 feet behind me in that direction. And I'm going to put it at an angle that's the same line angle of the club, right? So if I have this club flush to the ground, it creates this angle, right? It's typically going to be around 60 degrees, right? So if I have that, right, now I can make swings where I got to make myself swing underneath that, right? So I want to have my feet parallel with that stick. I don't want to cheat it by going like this, right? I want to have my feet parallel to that stick, and I'm just going to make swings where I do this. And I would just start out with shorter, slower swings, and then build up to longer and faster swings. You may even start out with no ball and just get to where you can do it without a ball. But this would be a great drill to help shallow out the club. Because typically when people are coming over the top, right, they get up to the top, arms and the club go out over the stick, right? But if I have to keep my arms underneath, right, if I got to keep my arms underneath that stick the whole time, right, that's going to make me shallow it out. So that's a great drill that you can do. Again, I'll put a link in the, let me bring that up here. So in the chat here, I just put a link in the chat where you can pick up a swing plate if you'd like to get one. All right, let's keep going. But that'd be a quick drill you can do. All right, so Mike says, difficulty in getting my swing to hit ball first. Problem is I'm trying to change from and arms swing to getting my trail elbow tucked. And muscle memory has taken over yet. Dealing with that, experimenting with getting more of a hip turn and bumping hips slightly more towards target. Currently, my hip movement is roughly 4 or 5 inches from my setup. Any suggestions? Yeah, so it'd be hard to say without seeing your swing. That's probably about right. That's typically the number one thing is we're just hanging back. So if your hips are forward enough, I'd maybe look at your upper body. So if let's say your hips are like this, but your upper body is like this, right? That's going to tend to hitting behind the ball. So having your lead shoulder also forward with your hips would be what I'd be looking at. So look at your lead shoulder, not necessarily the hips, because what it sounds like is you're just bumping the hips and the upper body stays back. So let the entire body needs to move forward. So R&H Turner says, I couldn't get here in time and new here. Is this a live session available afterwards? I think I missed you answering my question about starting a swing. Yes. So the all the office hours are archived. So all you have to do is go to the office hours page. So if you go to the top of the page there's if you go to the instruction tab, and then if you that menu comes down, then you go to office hours, then you go to office hours highlights. If you scroll down to the office hours highlights page, you'll find the playlist with all the archived office hours. So yes, you can go back. Yeah, I already answered that question. The short answer is develop a trigger to start your swing. Trigger can be many different things. For me, it's a few waggles, a look down at the ball, and then a push off my trail side into my lead side, pressure shift into my right foot. Pretty common that you see, on tour. I basically just copied what Tiger did, but you can have your leg kick in, you can have all kinds of things. So I would just try to develop a routine trigger that you use, and that's how you start the swing. So Diane C says, can you use the swing plate to help with the elbow plane? I just watched Clay. Yeah, so that drill that I just showed is basically to get you under that elbow plane line. Yep. All right. We got a few minutes left. If we got any more questions, about 5 minutes left here. RNA Turner says, great. I went back and watched it. I didn't ask the right question, maybe. How do you pull the club back and get it to the proper position in the top of the swing? I'm doing good with getting it shallowed out from here, but it doesn't feel natural on the initial part of the swing. Well, you can have a lot of different backswings. It's only a matter of how the downswing. The downswing is the only thing that matters, right? Because that's what you hit the ball with. So I should rephrase that. The backswing matters, but it only matters to get the club coming down. So if the club's coming down in the way that it should be, and your backswing feels off, then you really just need more reps to get more comfortable with it. Because whatever you were doing before was probably leading to you not bringing the club down correctly. So that's where the backswing matters, in the sense that, if you're making a backswing that makes you have a poor downswing, which is more than likely what was happening before. So what you were doing before, what felt natural to you, caused you most likely to come down steep from what it sounds like. And now you're shallowing it out, but your backswing feels awkward. Well, I would say that's pretty normal. You just need to get more reps in, getting comfortable with shallowing out the club. That's more than likely what needs to be happening. I will go over some things in the backswing that I do like to see. But again, there's all kinds of ways you can bring the club back. It's all about how you bring it down. So if you look at tour players, you're going to see a lot of different backswings, right? If you think about like a Matt Wolff, right? So Matt Wolff, he's like this. This is his backswing, right? If you look at like a Rory, here's his backswing, right? If you look at like a Raymond Floyd, here's his backswing, way inside. So there's all that, and then everything in between. So there's no one right way to bring the club back. The way to bring the club back is for you is the whatever allows you to bring the club down in a good place. So there are some things that I just don't see any good players doing in the backswing. So one would be a big hip sway, right? So we're swaying the hips a ton, right? So if you imagine if I draw a line on the outside of my hips, right? What I do see a lot of better players doing is they'll have a little bit of a move off the ball to start, but basically right away they'll get that hip going back and around. There's no good players that continue to sway their hips away that are like this at the top of the swing. It just makes it very, very difficult to be in a good position coming down. It makes it very difficult to make a good downswing, right? So that would be one, right? If you are someone who is doing that, then the chair drill is my favorite drill for this. Very, very simple. You just put a chair on the outside of your hip, right? So you nudge the chair to start the swing, right? So it's going to be touching your hip to start. You'll nudge it to start, and then when you get up to the top, you're going to create a little bit of a gap and get your momentum moving toward the target, right? So that would be a very easy drill. Another thing, this is something that we talk about in the top speed golf system that Clay talks about in the power turn course. That'd be a wide takeaway, right? So there aren't any good players that do this, right? They just pick up the club with the wrists. Pretty much every good player is, by the time this club is parallel to the ground, you're going to see the hands are clear of the body, right? So now the hands are not in front. And when you're looking from this face-on camera angle, right, my hands are not in front of now my hips have turned. So technically my hands are kind of in front of my hips, right? So if you look at this way, if I turn my hips, right, my hands are still in front of my hips. But when you're looking from this way, right, my hands are on this side of my body, right? And that would be like a wide takeaway. And the reason why this is in the power turn course is that if I just pick up the club like this, right, and I go up to the top, I'm going to tend to not turn my body. So that's why if I get a wide takeaway, look how much my shoulders have turned and the club's only gone that far, right? That just makes it so much easier to create a good shoulder turn as you get to the top. So a wide takeaway would be another thing, just not picking up the club with the wrist, but getting a nice wide takeaway. That would be one thing in the backswing. A reverse spine angle at the top, we don't really see that. So sometimes that can be caused by a hip sway, but sometimes you're not swaying your hips and you're like this at the top of the swing, right? So we don't see any good players that are like this, right? pretty much, and this is in the stable fluid spine course. Pretty much all good players are like this, where I'm angled away with my body. I'm a little bit at the top. So those would be kind of like three major things I would say, but that would be what I would if you're doing those things, those would be things I'd be working on. So John R says, "Hi Q, I'm about to switch from Bermuda to wet rye roughs for vacation. Any suggestions for chipping?" To be honest, I don't really know. I would say if you can chip out of Bermuda, you can chip out of anything. So I don't know that I've chipped out of rye before, but I know Bermuda is about the toughest to chip out of because it's so grainy. So I would say the rye is probably going to be a walk in the park compared to Bermuda. So I would say whatever you're doing on Bermuda will work just fine on really about anything. But I don't really know. To be honest with you, I don't know that I've ever chipped out a rye or know how it's different. Sorry, I wish I could help, but I honestly don't really know. But I know Bermuda is like typically the toughest. All right, we'll go ahead and wrap it up right there. Sorry I couldn't help more, John. But we'll be back here tomorrow, 11 a.m. Eastern time. Everybody have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you next time.